Hello, pre-calc students. This is Mr. Geiselhardt, and I am going to go ahead and give you a quick review of SOH-CAH-TOA. You should open up your assignment in Canvas. It's labeled 4- homework number 1, SOH-CAH-TOA. Make sure you have some paper to write on and make sure you have a calculator handy, as you'll need those to do this assignment. Before we get into any examples of sine, cosine, or tangent, we first have to talk about the reference angle and which side is considered to be the adjacent side, the opposite side, and the hypotenuse. The first side that I always try and identify is the hypotenuse. The hypotenuse is always the side that is opposite from the 90-degree angle. So I like to just draw a line that goes through the box of the 90-degree angle and draw an arrow, and that always points to the hypotenuse. Then we need to find the opposite and the adjacent side. Well, I have to look at which angle is my reference angle. Which angle am I given? In this case, it's theta. It might just be marked. It might be x. It might be theta. And that's the angle that we're going to be working from. So to find the opposite side, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say which side is opposite of my angle. And that side is the opposite side. The last side that we're going to be looking for is the adjacent side. The adjacent side is the side that makes up the angle and the hypotenuse. So if this is my angle here, the side that makes that angle along with the hypotenuse is my adjacent side. So we always want to first identify what is the opposite, what is the adjacent, and what is the hypotenuse. The first one we're going to look at is sine and inverse sine. So let's take a look at the sine example. Sine is the first part of our SOH-CAH-TOA, the SOH. S stands for the sine, O stands for the opposite over the H, which is hypotenuse. In my diagram over here, we have the side opposite of the 90-degree angle as my hypotenuse. The side opposite of my reference angle is going to be the opposite side. Since sine of theta is equal to the opposite over the hypotenuse, I can write an equation now. So we have the sine of my angle theta, which is 50 degrees, is equal to the opposite side, which is x, over the hypotenuse, which is 26. Now, there's a couple of different ways to solve this. I like to put this over 1 and then cross multiply. So I take x times 1 is equal to x, and then that equals 26 times the sine of 50. So then you're going to put that in your calculator and see what you get. One important note is to make sure that your calculator is in degree mode and not in radian mode. It cannot be in radian mode, otherwise you'll get the wrong answer. So then what we do is once you put that in your calculator, we're going to get an answer of 19.92 when rounded to 2 decimal places. Now we're going to use something called inverse sine to find the missing angle. Remember, whenever you want to find a missing angle, you use the inverse trig functions, which is inverse sine, inverse cosine, or inverse tangent. In this case, again, when I identify the side opposite the 90-degree angle, that's my hypotenuse. The side opposite of my reference angle is going to be the opposite side, so that means I'm going to use inverse sine, which is the inverse sine of the opposite over the hypotenuse. You could start off writing the equation by saying the sine of theta is equal to the opposite over the hypotenuse, and then rewrite it as the inverse sine of 86, which is the opposite, over 129, which is the hypotenuse, and plug that into your calculator. To get the inverse sine, that's where you hit the second sign, so hit the second button, and then hit the sign button, and you should get a symbol that looks something like that, the sign to the -1. When you plug that into your calculator, you should end up with something like 41.81 degrees. And again, remember, if you're looking for an angle, you need to do the inverse. If you're looking for a side, you just do the regular. Now we're going to take a look at cosine and inverse cosine. So cosine is the second part of our SOH-CAH-TOA, which is going to be C stands for cosine, A stands for the adjacent side, and H stands for hypotenuse. So once again, I'm going to identify what is the hypotenuse by drawing an arrow that goes straight across from the 90-degree angle. The adjacent side is the side that makes the given angle along with the hypotenuse. So this is the adjacent side. So when I want to write an equation now to solve for x, I'm going to do the cosine of my angle, which is 75 degrees, is equal to the adjacent side, which is 10, over the hypotenuse, which is x. Now again, we can cross multiply by putting that over 1. So when I do that, I'm going to get x times the cosine of 75 is equal to 1 times 10, which is just 10. So to solve for x now, I have to divide by the cosine of 75. And when I do that, I'm going to end up with 38.64 for the length of x. Now we're going to look at an inverse cosine problem. If you can see, I had a little typo in there, so I just crossed that sign out and put in inverse cosine. So to find a missing angle, if you know the adjacent and the hypotenuse, you're going to use inverse cosine. So in this case, we would say that the cosine of theta is equal to the adjacent side over the hypotenuse. To solve, we use the inverse cosine of the adjacent over the hypotenuse, and you plug that into your calculator, and you should end up with 21.21. The first examples we're going to look at are tangent and inverse tangent. Lastly, we're going to take a look at tangent and inverse tangent. So tangent is the TOA part of SOH-CAH-TOA, where the T stands for tangent, the O is opposite, and the A is adjacent. So now if I look at my diagram here, again, if I identify my hypotenuse first, that's not one of the pieces of information that I'm given or that I'm looking for, so I'm not going to use that one. The opposite side is the side that's opposite of my given angle, and the adjacent side is the side that makes the angle with the hypotenuse, so that's my adjacent side. In order to solve for x, I'm going to say that the tangent of my angle, which is 32, is equal to the opposite side over the adjacent side. Again, I can put this over 1 to cross multiply. So we have x times the tangent of 32 is equal to 11. Divide by the tangent of 32. And we'll end up with x is equal to 17.6. And lastly, I'm going to show you an example of inverse tangent. So just like the previous problem, we need to identify what the hypotenuse is, what the opposite side is, and what the adjacent side is. So in this case, we are given the opposite and adjacent, and to find the angle theta, I need to use the inverse tangent. So we'll do the inverse tangent of 11 over 16 and plug that into our calculator, and we should end up with 34.51. So that's a little review of SOH-CAH-TOA, and use this to do your first assignment in pre-calc. Good luck.